You've felt it, haven't you? That strange pull in the middle of ordinary moments, like something ancient inside you is waking up, stretching after a long sleep. Maybe it hits you at 3 a.m. when the world is quiet and your mind can't hide behind busyness anymore. Maybe it's in those seconds between tasks when the performance drops and you catch a glimpse of someone in the mirror you don't quite recognize. Here's what nobody tells you about that feeling. It's not anxiety. It's not a breakdown. It's your soul, and it's been waiting extraordinarily patiently for you to finally hear what it's been whispering all along. It's time to begin again. Not the surface-level kind of beginning where you change your hair, or your job, or your city, the kind that requires you to die to who you've been and trust that something truer will emerge from the ruins. Most people spend their entire lives running from this moment. They medicate it, distract from it, analyze it into submission, or dress it up in spiritual language that sounds profound but changes nothing. They collect healing modalities like baseball cards, attend workshops that promise transformation, and still wake up feeling like strangers in their own skin. And you know why? Because they're trying to renovate when the soul is calling for demolition. They're applying band-aids to ancestral wounds that require surgery. They're seeking comfort when what's actually being offered is rebirth, messy, terrifying, non-negotiable rebirth. The truth that will either liberate you or make you close this video is this: you can't begin again without letting something die first. And what needs to die is every version of yourself you constructed to survive, to please, to fit in, to avoid the very aliveness that's now knocking at your door. But here's the gift hidden inside the terror. Your soul chose this moment. Not randomly, not cruelly, with precision. Everything you've survived, every heartbreak you've endured, every time you've had to start over when you thought you had nothing left, it was all preparing you for now, for this threshold, for the moment when the old way of existing finally becomes more unbearable than the fear of the unknown. The exhaustion you feel isn't weakness, it's the exile asking to come home. The restlessness that wakes you in the night isn't insomnia, it's your spirit refusing to be sedated anymore. And those symbols that keep appearing, those dreams that won't leave you alone, that inexplicable knowing that something has to change, even though you can't articulate what or how, that's not confusion. That's the oracle speaking. And if you're here right now, reading these words, feeling that uncomfortable recognition in your chest, it means one thing: you're ready. Maybe not comfortable, maybe not confident, but ready. And what I'm about to share with you isn't theory. It's a map written in the language of the soul for those brave enough to walk without knowing the destination, to trust when logic screams retreat, to begin again when everything in you wants to stay small and safe. The waiting is over. Let's walk. There's a peculiar exhaustion that settles into the bones, not from working too hard, but from living too small. It's the fatigue of maintaining a life that no longer fits, like wearing shoes 2 sizes too tight and pretending your feet don't ache. This isn't the kind of tiredness that sleep can fix. It's the soul whispering that something essential has been left behind, buried under years of shoulds and supposed tos. The body keeps moving, but there's a silence underneath, a hollowness that no distraction can fill. You might find yourself staring at your reflection and feeling like you're looking at a stranger, someone who learned all the right lines but forgot the melody. This exhaustion, this sacred fatigue, is actually the first signal, the exile asking to come home. Most people mistake this moment for depression, burnout, or a midlife crisis. They rush to fix it with vacations, new jobs, or relationships that promise to fill the void. But the soul isn't interested in renovation. It's calling for demolition and rebirth. What's collapsing isn't you. It's the architecture of pretending, the carefully constructed persona that once protected you but now imprisons you. There's an ancestral wound buried in this exhaustion too. Generations of people who swallowed their truth, who chose survival over authenticity, who passed down the belief that being safe is more important than being alive. The ache you feel, isn't just yours. It's the accumulated grief of everyone in your lineage who never got to begin again, who died with their song still inside them, and now their unlived dreams pulse through your veins, asking, will you be the one who finally listens? The invitation arrives not as a thunderbolt, but as a persistent whisper, a song you can't quite remember but can't stop humming. You start noticing symbols everywhere, the same dream recurring, a phrase that keeps appearing in books, a restlessness that wakes you at 3 a.m. like clockwork. These aren't coincidences. They're breadcrumbs from the deeper self, the part of you that never forgot who you really are. The mirror is being held up, and though it's terrifying to look, something in you knows that this moment, this precise intersection of exhaustion and longing, is the threshold. The soul has been patient, extraordinarily patient, but now with a gentleness that could break your heart, it's saying, it's time. And deep in your chest, beneath the fear and the doubt, there's a recognition, faint but undeniable. You've been waiting for this calling, and the calling has been waiting for you. The resistance to beginning again isn't laziness, it's grief in disguise. There's a particular terror that grips the heart when the soul asks us to shed an identity we've spent decades building, even if that identity has been suffocating us. It's the fear of betraying everyone who knew the old version of you, the worry that changing means admitting you were wrong all along. But here's the paradox. The person you're afraid of losing never really existed in the first place. That carefully curated self was a survival mechanism, a role you played so convincingly that even you forgot you were acting. The shadow knows this truth, which is why it fights so hard when transformation beckons. It's not trying to hurt you, it's trying to protect the only version of safety it understands. The ego screams, if I let go, I'll disappear entirely, not realizing that what disappears is only the prison, not the prisoner. Every genuine rebirth requires a symbolic death, and our psyche treats symbolic death exactly like actual death, with panic, bargaining, and desperate attempts to maintain the status quo. This is why people sabotage themselves right at the edge of breakthrough, why relationships implode just as they're getting real, why opportunities vanish the moment they require us to show up differently. There's an ancestral wound here too, a cellular memory of all the times change meant danger, when being cast out from the tribe meant actual death. Your nervous system still carries those ancient fears, still believes that transformation equals annihilation. You might notice yourself suddenly exhausted when you think about making a change, or feeling physically ill when opportunity knocks. This isn't weakness. It's your body trying to keep you safe using outdated survival software. The forest of your psyche is dense with the ghosts of who you almost became, all the potential selves that got abandoned along the way. They're not judging you. They're waiting to see if this time will be different. What makes beginning again so terrifying is that you can't take everything with you. Some relationships won't survive your transformation. Some beliefs will shatter. Some versions of success will suddenly feel hollow. There's a genuine loss in letting the old self die, and pretending there isn't makes the journey harder. You're allowed to mourn the person you've been, even if that person was limiting you. You're allowed to feel scared of the unknown, even as you walk toward it. The ritual of transformation isn't about forcing yourself forward with clenched teeth and positive affirmations. It's about standing in the threshold between what was and what could be, acknowledging both the grief and the longing. It's about saying, I'm terrified and I'm going anyway. Because somewhere in your inner house, in a room you haven't visited in years, there's a version of you who never stopped believing that beginning again is possible. That version isn't waiting for you to be ready. It's waiting for you to be willing. Your body has been keeping score this whole time, recording every moment you swallowed your truth, every instance you smiled when you wanted to scream, every time you made yourself smaller to fit into spaces that were never meant for you. The tension in your jaw isn't just stress. It's all the words you never said crystallized into muscle memory. The tightness in your chest isn't anxiety. It's the grief of 1,000 unlived moments pressing against your rib cage, asking to be felt. Scientists talk about somatic memory, how trauma gets stored in fascia and tissue, but what they're really describing is the body's oracle function, the way flesh becomes a living archive of the soul's journey. Every chronic ache, every inexplicable pain that doctors can't quite diagnose, is often your body speaking a language your mind has forgotten how to hear. The spirit doesn't just live in your thoughts or your heart. It lives in the marrow of your bones, in the rhythm of your breath, in the way you hold yourself when no one's watching. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from living disconnected from your body, a fatigue that no amount of sleep can touch, because it's not physical tiredness, it's existential dissonance. You might notice yourself holding your breath without realizing it, or discovering that your shoulders have been hunched for hours, or feeling like you're watching your life happen from slightly outside yourself. This isn't dissociation in the clinical sense. It's the soul's protective mechanism, a veil it drew between you and your body when the pain of being fully present became too much. Children do this instinctively during trauma, and many of us never fully returned. We learn to live from the neck up, treating our bodies like vehicles we pilot rather than homes we inhabit. The abyss between mind and body grows wider with each year of ignoring what we feel until we become strangers to our own flesh. But here's what most people don't realize. Your body never stopped waiting for you to come back. It's been holding space, keeping the lights on in rooms you abandoned, maintaining the sacred pulse of life even when you weren't paying attention. The return to the body isn't about yoga classes or green smoothies, though those can be doorways. It's about relearning to trust the wisdom that lives below language, the knowing that exists in your gut, your heart, your cellular intelligence. When you feel that sudden urge to cry for no apparent reason, that's not weakness, that's your body releasing what your mind has been carrying. When you get an inexplicable feeling about a person or situation that turns out to be right, that's not luck. That's your somatic intuition functioning as it was designed to. Your body is the mirror through which the soul sees itself. And when you start actually listening, really listening to what it's telling you, everything shifts. You might begin to notice that your body tenses around certain people before your mind registers the red flag, or that it relaxes in specific places before you consciously understand why. This is the language of return, the vocabulary of reconnection. And as you learn to inhabit your flesh again, as you practice being fully present in this miraculous vehicle, something extraordinary happens. The spirit that's been waiting in exile finally finds its way home. There's a reason you haven't been able to move forward, and it's not what you think. It's not laziness, lack of discipline, or insufficient willpower. Those blockages that feel like walls are actually guardians, ancient protectors stationed at the threshold of your becoming, making sure you don't access power you're not yet ready to hold. The shadow isn't your enemy. It's your most loyal servant, the part of you that says not yet. When the ego rushes toward transformation, it hasn't earned through depth. Think about it. Every time you've self-sabotaged right before a breakthrough, every time you've found yourself inexplicably stuck despite knowing what you need to do, something deeper was at work. That resistance isn't failure. It's divine timing expressing itself through your psyche. The soul operates on mythic time, not linear time, and what looks like delay from the outside is often sacred preparation on the inside. Your blockages are holding something precious until you develop the capacity to steward it wisely. Most spiritual teachings tell you to overcome your shadow, to banish your resistance, to push through your blocks with force and determination. But this approach treats symptoms while ignoring the oracle function of obstruction. When a plant isn't blooming, you don't yell at it or shame it into flowering. You investigate what conditions it needs that it's not receiving. Your blocks are messengers carrying vital information about what's missing, what hasn't been integrated, what old wound needs tending before new growth can emerge. Maybe you keep sabotaging relationships because there's an ancestral pattern of betrayal that needs to be acknowledged and released. Maybe you can't move forward in your career because success meant danger in your family system, and your body still equates visibility with punishment. Maybe you're blocked creatively because there's grief you haven't grieved, rage you haven't felt, or truth you haven't spoken. The blockage isn't random. It's precise, intelligent, and deeply protective. And the moment you stop fighting it and start listening to it, everything changes. The real work isn't pushing past your shadow. It's sitting with it long enough to understand what it's protecting. This requires a particular kind of courage, the willingness to be with discomfort without immediately trying to fix it, transform it, or spiritually bypass it. You light a candle in your inner house and ask, what are you guarding? What am I not ready to see? And then you wait in the silence, in the uncomfortable not knowing, until the answer surfaces. Sometimes the shadow reveals that you're blocked because you're trying to force a path that isn't yours, chasing someone else's definition of success or enlightenment. Sometimes it shows you that what you think you want would actually destroy something essential in you, and the block is mercy in disguise. And sometimes, most powerfully, the shadow admits that it's been protecting you from your own magnitude, from the terrifying responsibility of actually becoming who you're meant to be. When you're finally ready to receive your light without letting it inflate your ego or burn out your humanity, the shadow steps aside, not because you defeated it, but because it recognizes you've finally grown strong enough to carry what's been waiting on the other side. There's a phase in every genuine transformation that feels like death by stagnation, where nothing moves, nothing changes, nothing makes sense. You're no longer who you were, but you're not yet who you're becoming. The old life has ended, but the new one hasn't begun. You're suspended in what the mystics call the void, and every fiber of your being wants to escape this uncomfortable in-between. Friends ask what you're up to, and you have no answer that makes sense. You try to force movement, create plans, generate momentum, but everything you touch feels hollow or falls apart. This isn't failure. This is the most sacred phase of transformation, the one nobody warns you about because it can't be romanticized or packaged into inspirational quotes. This is the silence between eras, the pause between one breath ending and another beginning. And though it feels like abandonment, like the universe has forgotten you, the opposite is true. You're being held in the womb of becoming, and gestation cannot be rushed. The discomfort of this phase is almost unbearable because our culture has no framework for honoring sacred emptiness. We're taught that productivity equals worth, that movement equals progress, that if nothing's happening, we're doing something wrong. But the soul operates by different laws. In nature, there's a period between winter and spring where everything looks dead, but is actually gathering life force underground, the pulse of existence preparing for emergence. Seeds don't apologize for their time in darkness. They trust the process of invisible growth. Yet we panic when life asks us to be fallow, when the forest of our psyche needs to compost the old before fertile ground appears. This waiting period strips away everything you thought you knew about yourself, every strategy that used to work, every identity you could hide behind. It's not punishment, it's purification. The ancestral patterns you've been carrying, the borrowed dreams, the inherited fears, they all surface during this silence, asking to be witnessed and released. And you can't skip this part. Trying to bypass the void only extends it. What makes this phase bearable is understanding that emptiness isn't the absence of something, it's the presence of potential. The abyss you're staring into isn't meaningless. It's pregnant with every possibility you haven't yet imagined. This is where the oracle speaks clearest, where intuition becomes louder than the noise of the world. In the silence, you start to hear what you couldn't hear when you were busy performing your life. You begin to feel what you've been running from. You discover that the inner house has rooms you never knew existed, and some of them hold treasures you abandoned decades ago. The mirror becomes clearer when there's nothing to distract from what it reflects. And slowly, achingly slowly, something shifts. Not because you forced it, not because you figured it out, but because you finally stopped resisting the not knowing. You learned to inhabit the question instead of demanding the answer. You practice being comfortable with mystery, with uncertainty, with the radical trust that the ground will appear when you're ready to walk again. And one morning, without fanfare or announcement, you wake up and realize the silence has shifted. Something new is stirring. The waiting isn't over yet, but you can feel it, the first tremor of rebirth beginning to move through you. There's a particular kind of terror that comes with admitting you don't have a map, a plan, or even a clear destination, just a knowing that you must walk. The pilgrim doesn't leave home because they've figured everything out. They leave because staying has become more unbearable than the uncertainty of the road. This is the archetype that activates when the soul decides to begin again, not the hero charging toward glory, but the wanderer trusting that each step will reveal the next. Our culture worships certainty, demands 5-year plans, celebrates people who have it all figured out. But the pilgrim knows a secret. The path doesn't exist until you walk it, and the destination reveals itself only to those brave enough to move without seeing the whole staircase. This isn't recklessness. It's the deepest form of faith. It's saying yes to the journey before you know where it leads, trusting that your feet know the way even when your mind is lost in fog. The pilgrim archetype carries a particular wound that every person beginning again must face. The fear of being foolish, of making the wrong choice, of wasting precious time on a path that leads nowhere. There's an ancestral echo here too, the memory of those who wandered and perished, who trusted and were betrayed, who left safety and found only suffering. Your nervous system remembers these stories even if your conscious mind doesn't, which is why beginning again without guarantees feels like walking toward your own death. But here's what separates the pilgrim from the wanderer: intention. The pilgrim isn't lost. They're following an invisible thread, a pulse that beats beneath the surface of things. They've learned to read signs that others dismiss, the synchronicities, the dreams, the inexplicable pull towards certain people or places. They trust their intuition more than they trust logic, their bodies knowing more than their mind's calculations. And most importantly, they've made peace with the reality that mistakes aren't failures, they're course corrections. Every wrong turn teaches something essential. Every detour carries hidden gifts. Every apparent setback is actually the path revealing itself in ways you couldn't have planned. What makes the pilgrim's journey sacred isn't the destination. It's the transformation that happens in the walking itself. You don't return to who you were before the exile. You become someone entirely new through the act of wandering. The forest you walk through changes you at a cellular level, rewiring your brain, recalibrating your heart, teaching your body what it means to trust the unfolding. You learn to read the mirror of your experiences differently, not as evidence of success or failure, but as feedback from the soul about alignment and direction. You discover that being lost isn't the opposite of being found. It's the necessary precursor. The moments when you have no idea what you're doing are often the moments you're most exactly where you need to be. And gradually, something remarkable happens. You stop needing to know. The anxiety about having all the answers dissolves. The urgency to arrive somewhere fades. You begin to understand that you're not walking toward a destination. You're walking yourself home to a way of being. The pilgrim's gift is this. They teach us that beginning again isn't about having courage to face the unknown. It's about developing the humility to admit that you never really knew anything in the first place, and the grace to find that admission not terrifying, but liberating. There's a fortress most people build without realizing it, walls constructed brick by brick with every disappointment, every betrayal, every moment they showed up fully and got rejected. It's not conscious. You don't wake up one day and decide to close your heart. It happens gradually, like calluses forming on hands that work too hard, until one day you realize you can't feel anything anymore. Not the bad, which was the point, but not the good either, which becomes the tragedy. The soul knows that love is the only true alchemy, the only force that can transform lead into gold, wound into wisdom, exile into homecoming. But love requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires tearing down walls you spent years building. This is why so many people stay stuck, not because they don't want to heal, but because healing demands they become touchable again, that they risk the very pain they've worked so hard to avoid. The shadow rises up and whispers, "You survived by closing down. Opening up means you might not survive what comes next." But here's what the shadow doesn't tell you. The version of you that survived by shutting down isn't living. It's existing. There's a difference between a heart that beats and a heart that loves, between breathing and actually being alive. The ancestral wound carries this pattern too. Generations of people who learned that love was conditional, dangerous, or a luxury they couldn't afford. They passed down a survival strategy disguised as wisdom. Don't need anyone, don't trust too deeply, don't let them see the real you. And you internalized it so completely that you forgot it was ever a choice. Now your inner house has rooms you won't let anyone enter. Parts of yourself you've locked away even from your own awareness. You've become so good at self-sufficiency that you've forgotten how to receive, so skilled at appearing strong that you've lost access to your tenderness. The irony is devastating. You're dying of thirst while refusing to drink, surrounded by potential connection but unable to let it in. The walls that once protected you have become your prison, and the key to freedom is the very thing you're most afraid of, allowing yourself to be seen, touched, changed by love. The alchemy happens not when you find the perfect person or the ideal circumstance, but when you make the terrifying decision to show up with your whole heart anyway, knowing it might break. Again, this isn't about romance, though. That can be one doorway. It's about letting life touch you, letting beauty move you to tears, letting grief crack you open, letting joy find you even when you don't think you deserve it. It's about looking in the mirror and recognizing that the person staring back isn't broken beyond repair, just wounded in ways that made sense at the time. The ritual of becoming touchable again starts small. Maybe you let yourself cry in front of someone, or admit you don't have it all together, or ask for help without apologizing for needing it. Each act of vulnerability is an act of rebellion against the silence you've been maintaining, a reclaiming of your right to be human and messy and beautifully imperfect. And something miraculous happens when you stop performing invincibility. The right people step forward, not to fix you or complete you, but to witness you. And in that witnessing, in being seen and not abandoned, the pulse of your heart remembers what it was always meant to do: connect, expand, love without a guarantee of safety. The soul begins again, not when you have all the answers, but when you're finally willing to be touched by the questions. Your brain is a prediction machine, constantly scanning the environment and past experiences to forecast what comes next. And when you've been hurt repeatedly, disappointed chronically, or lived in survival mode for years, your neural pathways become highways of pessimism. It's not that you're choosing to be negative. Your brain is literally wired to expect the worst because that's what kept you alive. Neuroscience calls this negativity bias, but the soul understands it differently. It's the shadow's protective mechanism, the body's way of saying, "We've seen this before, and it didn't end well." Every time you tried to begin again and failed, every time you opened your heart and got hurt, every time you took a risk and crashed, your brain catalogued it as evidence. And now when the possibility of rebirth emerges, your neurochemistry floods you with anxiety, doubt, and the overwhelming urge to retreat. The dopamine pathways that once fired with hope have been pruned back. The serotonin systems that regulated your mood have been dysregulated by chronic stress. Your brain isn't sabotaging you, it's trying to protect you using the only data it has, the past. But here's where it gets fascinating. Your brain is also remarkably plastic. capable of rewiring itself when given new experiences and sustained attention. The forest of neural connections isn't fixed. It's constantly growing, pruning, reorganizing based on where you direct your focus and what you repeatedly practice. When you begin to feed your mind different inputs, when you intentionally seek moments of beauty, practice gratitude not as a cliché but as a genuine noticing. Surround yourself with people who believe in possibility. Your neurochemistry starts to shift. Dopamine receptors that had gone dormant begin to wake up. Oxytocin, the bonding hormone that makes connection feel safe, starts flowing again when you risk vulnerability and aren't destroyed by it. Even your stress hormone cortisol begins to regulate when you create consistent rituals of presence and rest. This isn't positive thinking or spiritual bypassing. It's biological transformation. Your ancestral nervous system, which has been stuck in fight or flight for generations, begins to remember what safety feels like. The pulse of your physiology changes from survival to thriving, and suddenly things that seemed impossible start feeling within reach. The real transformation happens when you understand that believing again isn't about forcing optimism or pretending everything's fine. It's about giving your brain enough evidence that a different outcome is possible. This is why small wins matter so much in the beginning stages of rebirth. Every time you do something you didn't think you could do, every time you're vulnerable and it doesn't destroy you, every time you take a step toward the unknown and survive it, you're literally creating new neural pathways. The mirror neurons in your brain, which fire both when you act and when you observe others acting, can be activated by immersing yourself in stories of transformation. Reading about people who began again, listening to accounts of others who walked through the abyss and came out whole. Your brain starts to internalize these narratives as possibilities for your own life. The inner house of your mind begins to reorganize itself, clearing out old furniture of limiting beliefs and making space for new potential. And one day, without conscious effort, you notice something has shifted. Hope doesn't feel naive anymore. Trust doesn't feel foolish. Beginning again doesn't trigger panic. It triggers curiosity. Your neurochemistry has caught up with what your soul always knew. You were always capable of this. You just needed your brain to believe it too. Most people go through life as if they're waiting for permission to fully arrive, waiting until they've healed enough, achieved enough, transformed enough to deserve being here completely. But the soul doesn't wait for worthiness to descend from the heavens. It claims its presence as an act of sacred defiance. This is what it means to live as one chosen by time, not because you're special in some ego-inflated sense, but because you've stopped arguing with the moment you're in. You've ceased the exhausting negotiation with reality, the constant, "I'll be present when," that keeps you perpetually exiled from your own life. The ritual of presence isn't complicated, it's devastatingly simple. It's the willingness to be here, fully here, in this breath, this heartbeat, this absolutely ordinary moment that will never come again. And when you practice this, when you stop treating the present as a waiting room for some better future, everything shifts. The mundane becomes sacred, the ordinary reveals itself as oracle. The now stops being something to endure and becomes the only portal to the life you've been seeking. There's a particular kind of presence that marks those who've walked through the abyss and returned. They carry a stillness that isn't passive but powerful, a groundedness that comes from having faced the shadow and survived it. They're not performing spirituality or collecting peak experiences like trophies. They've learned that real transformation happens in the smallest moments, the way you greet the morning, the consciousness you bring to washing dishes, the quality of attention you offer to someone speaking. These aren't trivial acts. They're rituals of return, ways of anchoring the spirit into flesh and time. When you touch an object with full awareness, you're practicing embodiment. When you listen to someone without planning your response, you're creating space for genuine connection. When you notice the silence between sounds, the pause between thoughts, You're accessing the same mystery that births galaxies and guides migrations. The ancestral wisdom that lives in your bones knows this. The sacred isn't somewhere else, waiting to be found. It's here, hidden in plain sight, revealing itself only to those who've developed eyes to see. The deepest ritual isn't about candles or ceremonies, though those can be doorways. It's about recognizing that you are the ceremony. Every action becomes an offering when performed with full presence. Every breath becomes prayer when taken with awareness. Every moment becomes initiation when met without resistance. This is what the soul has been waiting for. Not for you to become someone else, but for you to fully inhabit who you already are. To stop the endless rehearsal and finally take the stage. To cease living in the mirror of how you think you should be and start living from the pulse of what you actually are. The forest of your life, with all its dense undergrowth, its clearings and shadows, its beauty and its thorns, isn't something to escape or transcend. It's the sacred ground where your becoming happens. And when you stop treating this moment as practice for some future enlightenment, when you recognize that this breath, this heartbeat, this absolutely imperfect now is the only moment the universe has ever given you, something extraordinary happens. You stop becoming and start being. The waiting ends, the exile dissolves, and you realize what mystics have whispered for millennia. You were never separate from what you were seeking. You were just waiting for permission to recognize what was always true. The soul has been preparing for this moment, and the moment has finally arrived. So here you are at the end of this journey and the beginning of your own. And I need to ask you something that might make you uncomfortable. What are you going to do with what you've just heard? Because here's the truth that separates those who transform from those who just consume transformation content. It's not about knowing. You can know everything I've shared, understand it intellectually, feel moved by it emotionally, and still wake up tomorrow living the exact same life. Knowledge without embodiment is just entertainment. Wisdom without action is just philosophy. The soul doesn't care how much you understand about rebirth. It cares whether you're willing to actually walk through the fire. So I'm asking you, are you going to let this be another beautiful idea you file away? Or are you going to let it destroy the life that's been suffocating you? Here's what beginning again actually requires, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It demands that you stop waiting for perfect conditions, stop rehearsing for some future moment when you'll finally be ready, and start showing up now, messy, uncertain, terrified, and real. It means you might have to have conversations you've been avoiding, release relationships that no longer serve your becoming, admit you've been lying to yourself about what you actually want. It means sitting with the shadow instead of spiritually bypassing it, feeling the ancestral wounds instead of transcending them prematurely, inhabiting your body when it's screaming truths your mind doesn't want to hear. Beginning again means practicing presence when your entire nervous system wants to dissociate, choosing vulnerability when every fiber of your being wants to hide, trusting your intuition even when it contradicts everything you've been taught about how life should look. This isn't a self-help checklist. It's a ritual of return that will ask everything of you. And the question is, are you willing to give it? Let me tell you what happens if you don't. You'll go back to the comfortable numbness, the familiar patterns, the life that looks fine from the outside but feels hollow on the inside. You'll keep scrolling for the next video, the next teacher, the next breakthrough that will finally fix you without requiring you to change. And 5 years from now, you'll be in the exact same place, maybe more knowledgeable, maybe more spiritually sophisticated in your language, but no more alive. The soul will keep calling, but each time you ignore it, the voice gets quieter, the signs get subtler, until one day you wake up and realize you can't hear it anymore. And that's not dramatic. That's just what happens when we choose safety over truth, comfort over growth, the known prison over the unknown freedom. The exile becomes permanent, not because the door is locked, but because you stop remembering there's a door at all. But if you're feeling that uncomfortable stirring right now, that mixture of fear and recognition, and something that almost feels like remembering. That's your soul confirming what I'm saying is true. You know it. Maybe not with your logical mind, but with something deeper, something that can't be argued away or rationalized into submission. And that knowing is your compass. Trust it more than you trust your fear. Trust it more than you trust the voices that tell you to play it safe. Trust it more than you trust the part of you that's terrified of being seen, of failing, of discovering you're more powerful than you ever allowed yourself to believe. The pilgrim doesn't wait for courage to descend from the heavens. They walk scared. The alchemist doesn't wait to feel ready. They enter the fire anyway. And you don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to take the next step. One breath, one choice, one moment of radical honesty. That's how rebirth happens. Not in one dramatic transformation, but in 1,000 tiny deaths and rebirths that eventually add up to a completely different life. So let me ask you again, and this time answer honestly, even if it's just to yourself. What would your life look like if you actually listened to what your soul has been trying to tell you? What would you do differently tomorrow if you stopped performing your life and started living it? Who would you become if you gave yourself permission to shed every identity that no longer fits? What rituals could you create? Simple, daily, sacred acts that anchor you in presence instead of performance. These aren't rhetorical questions. They're invitations, and the answers are already inside you, waiting in the silence, hiding in the forest of your inner house, etched into the cellular memory of your body. You don't need to search for them. You need to create the space for them to surface. And then you need to have the courage to honor what emerges, even when it asks you to release everything you thought you needed. This isn't the end of something. It's the beginning of your actual life. The one you came here to live. The one your soul chose, even if your ego is terrified of it. And you're not walking this path alone. Everyone who's ever had the courage to begin again, every ancestor who chose truth over comfort, every version of yourself that refused to settle, they're all walking with you. This is your moment, not someday, not when you're more healed, more ready, more certain. Now, this breath, this heartbeat, this absolutely imperfect, beautifully uncertain now. The soul has been waiting, time has been holding space, and the universe is asking, are you ready to begin again? If this resonated with something deep inside you, if you felt seen in ways that words can barely capture, then this channel is your sanctuary. Subscribe and turn on notifications because we're going deeper into the shadows you've been avoiding, the wounds you've been carrying, the rebirth you've been postponing. This isn't content you consume and forget. This is the work of remembering who you are beneath all the layers of who you had to become. And we're just getting started. The oracle is speaking, the mirror is clear, and the path is revealing itself one step at a time. Welcome home.